Well, thank you everyone for coming today. Before I formally start the meeting, please can I check that the live stream has started? I will go to each committee member to confirm that they can hear and be heard. This is a legal requirement for me to do so. So if you could verbally reconfirm that you're able to hear me, and I will confirm in response that I can hear you. Councillor Paul Andrews.
Chair, I can hear and see you clearly.
Councillor Philip Andrews. Sorry, Councillor Philip Howells.
Yes, Chair, I can see and hear you clearly.
Councillor Mike Jones.
Yes, I can see and hear you. Thank you.
Councillor Diana Toynbee.
Yes, good afternoon. I can hear you and see you.
And moving to our educational co-optees, please note that Mr James has been appointed as the Parent Governor Representative for the SEN sector, and Mr Prattley has been appointed as the Hereford Diocese Representative. Mr James.
Yes, I can hear and see you.
Mr Prattley.
Yes, Chair, I can see and hear you, but my system is on a delay, so I might re-log in on a different system. Is that permitted?
Yes, that's fine. If you just use the same link for the meeting.
Right. I've got a list of officers that are here today. I won't go through them all, as it will take a considerable part of the meeting, but obviously as we get to them, we will introduce them. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's virtual meeting. And this is the first one since the annual general meeting of the council. So I would like to welcome back all my committee members. The council is video and audio streaming this meeting live on the internet and making an official recording. The recording will form part of the public record of the meeting. Please note that it is a legal requirement that every member attending virtual meetings is able to hear and, where practicable, see and be heard, and where practicable, be seen by the other members in attendance and the public watching. So I ask that you please have your audio switched on and also have your video enabled where possible. For virtual meetings, there are some additional points for members of the committee and officers to be aware of. As part of our meeting etiquette and in line with our normal committee practices, all microphones apart from mine will be placed on mute at the start and during the meeting. I will run through the agenda in the customary way. When you wish to speak, please use the hand button against your name in the participants list, which should be on the right of your screens. I will then invite you to speak in order of the hands being raised. Electronic voting will be used at this meeting. You will be asked to use the electronic polls to vote to confirm the minutes and agree recommendations. When the poll appears on screen, please select an option and press submit. If the poll does not appear on your screen, please access the poll icon at the foot of your screen in Zoom. If you are unable to vote, please raise your virtual hand. Item 1 of the agenda, apologies for absence. Matt, do I have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've received apologies for absence from Councillor Graham Andrews and Councillor Hay as well. And sorry, Chair, can we just go to Mr. Prattley again, just to confirm now he's logged in again on another system that he can hear and can be heard.
Okay, can you hear and?
Yes, I can hear, and hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Thank you, Mr. Prattley. Thank you, Matt. Do we have any named substitutes for Councillor Hay and Councillor Andrews?
No nominated substitutes.
Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare any Schedule 1, Schedule 2 or other interests in any of today's agenda items? Could you please do this by raising your virtual hand, and I will then ask you to speak to notify the meeting which item you have an interest in and the nature of that interest. Mr. Pratley.
As the chairman of Venture, I need to declare an interest in the item that talks about the families first.
Okay. Thank you. We move on then to the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of September. The minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of September are included in the agenda. Hang on, are we looking at the 25th or the 15th, Matt?
Apologies, it's the 15th of September.
15th. The minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of September are included in the agenda on pages 7 to 30 for approval. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer, so I will ask committee members to confirm that they agree the minutes by an electronic vote. Non-voting attendees will be moved to a breakout room for a few moments. They will be returned to the meeting room when all eligible votes have been cast. Please can non-voting attendees now be moved out of the meeting room and the number of voting members be confirmed. Thank you.
Okay, Chair, non-voting members have been removed. There are 7 voting members on this item and they can cast their vote now. The votes are in. 6 have voted in favour to approve the minutes and 1 abstention, Chair.
Thank you. Can we please have the non-voting attendees brought back into the meeting room? Okay.
Yep.
Right. Item 5 is questions from the members of the public. Is there any questions from members of the public? Matt?
No questions from members of the public.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the council?
No questions from members of the council.
Thank you. Item 7 then, we move on to update on reducing the number of looked after children. I invite Jill Cox to present this report. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can I start with just mentioning that we've agreed to change my job title. So you'll notice on your screens it says Head of LAC. So we're working very hard to change the language that we use to talk about children in care. One of the things that we know is that they really, really dislike the term LAC. So we've agreed that my job title will change to Head of Service for Children and for care experienced children and young people, and you'll see I'm still getting used to it. So we're working on changing that through kind of formal processes as well, but we're working really hard to not talk about lack. I'd encourage you all to look out for that and do your best to avoid it where you can. We do know that it's very ingrained in our work. So this afternoon's meeting was to look at the report that Liz Elgar wrote. We kind of co-produced it, I guess. So Liz may want to contribute at some point as well. So it's to provide an update on the work to reduce our numbers of children in care. There's quite a lot of detail in the report, so I won't go through it all to you, but just to bring some highlights. So the numbers of children in care have reduced since last November. I think in October last year they were at 350. They actually rose again a little bit after that and have now reduced to it was 336 at the end of November. As of yesterday, it was 337. And we do anticipate that that will continue to gradually reduce with all the work that is happening, but it will be a gradual reduction. So we remain with a much higher than statistical neighbours, national and regional number of children in care. Since the report last year, 32 children have had their care orders discharged, and that was 11 have been reunified home and had their care orders discharged, and 21 children have been made the subject of a special guardianship order, which grants parental responsibility for other carers. So often family members, and in some cases their previous foster carers that were recruited through the local authority. And we do have further applications that are in the court process now, and we have further applications that will be made in the coming months. So some children are already placed at home. So children that are subject to a care order return home under what's called placement with parent regulations. So there's then a period of time of testing out that arrangement, making sure that it is safe and that those families are well supported before we make an application for discharge. So we do have further cohort of children who are living at home with their parents. So in terms of what has contributed to the progress that we've made so far and the work that's got ongoing, one of the biggest areas is really around practice change and challenge to our social workers, and really looking at how we can explore any option to move children out of the care system where that's the safe thing to do and in their best interests. And that's been a real progress of winning hearts and minds, really helping social workers to think through what the options are, making sure that we have the right support in place for SGO carers and for reunification home. And since April of this year, we've had our ECHO service in place, and that's our Edge of Care and Reunification Home service. So that's a relatively new team, and obviously it started just in the early stages of lockdown, which was an additional challenge, but it's proving incredibly successful. In terms of both aspects of the service, in terms of preventing children coming into care where there's risk of family disruption and breakdown, often children who are coming into or are adolescent, and there's the kind of normal tensions within a family, but often exacerbated by other things within those families. And if we provide the right support, we are showing that we can prevent those children coming into care. Not in every case, but certainly the evidence so far is in more than half. And in terms of reunification, that team is also supporting children to return home. And again, that's proving very, very successful. We've had an increase in family support into different aspects of our service. So that includes the assessment service, where we recognise that if we can get the right support at an early stage, we can prevent difficulties within families escalating and prevent them getting to the point where they might need to become looked after. Similarly, within our child protection and court teams, there's also been additional family support included within those teams, and they are really focusing on, again, supporting reunification where that can be achieved, and for children in proceedings where they are placed early with alternative family members. We know that if the courts are reassured that that's the right placement for the child, that they will consider concluding care proceedings with a special guardianship order rather than a care order. So what we've been able to do is through a legal process, place those children with family members and then provide the family support to help them work through those early teething problems, to give them additional support that they might need to adapt to what is undoubtedly a massive change in family circumstances and a big commitment, but that is enabling some care proceedings to conclude with an SGO, which means those children don't move into the looked after system on a long-term basis. And again, that's starting to work and pay dividends. There's been an increase in resource into early help and the early help hub, making sure that we provide the right help at the right time. The domestic abuse hub commenced in August this year, and again is making sure that there's an early response to low-level concerns about domestic abuse. We've looked at long-term matching for children in care, and this is about making sure that we're really providing children in care with stability where we can. So those children that are settled in placement and aren't able to move on to an SGO, we go through a formal process of long-term matching them, and that enables them to know that that's intended to be their long-term placement through to adulthood, unless they can go home. And it enables us to reduce the number of visits to them and some of the kind of social work intervention that comes with being looked after. We've been working with our adoption service, Adoption Central England, so to increase the number of children that are placed in foster to adopt placements. So for children who we can anticipate the end care plan will be adoption, we can place children with prospective adopters as foster children. So we enable looked after children to be placed with people who are already approved as adopters. And as long as we provide the right support, that enables the adults to take the risk of that care plan changing rather than the child, and means that where that plan of adoption is approved, the child doesn't need to have another move. And we recognise that there's probably more we can do there if we improve our early permanency work for unborn children even more, but that is proving, again, we are starting to see more foster to adopt placements. We're also implementing Signs of Safety, our new social work model of practice, and that supports all of this work. All of this work is around providing the right support to families, enabling families to find their own solutions, and working with everyone in a strengths-based way. And I think that very much supports all of these initiatives that we're working on. In terms of some of the things that we are concerned about, one of the areas that we are concerned about is the increase of children and young people that we're having to place in residential care. And we have seen that number increase, particularly in the last few months. We're working to understand the reasons behind that. We do think that COVID is impacting on the availability of foster placements, both in-house and within the independent sector. But we are seeing that we really struggle to find placements for children who are teenagers or even just below the age of adolescence. So in order to try and address that, we've made some changes to our HIPS scheme, which is our therapeutic foster placement scheme, and we've offered our general foster carers the opportunity to offer HIPS placements, which means they receive an enhanced fee and an increased support package, which includes a team with a psychologist, out-of-hours support, and regular meetings with the professional network to support them. So we had our first child move into a HIPS placement on Friday, and we have another child who will move in the next couple of weeks, next week in fact, and we're working to identify other carers who could offer the same with that enhanced support. That in itself we know won't be sufficient to respond to the difficulty that we're seeing. So we're also looking at a range of measures to recruit and retain foster carers. One of those are some proposals to increase the financial support offered to our foster carers, and that's due to be considered by Cabinet in December. And we're also looking at how we can work to improve our marketing, and we're also looking at how we can work constructively in partnership with independent fostering agencies to encourage them to offer children in residential a step-down placement. So that is a snapshot of the information that's included in the report. So I'm happy to take questions, and I'm sure Liz and Chris may also want to add to this.
Thank you, Jill. I'd like to ask a question first of all. I know it's early days because the Educare service has only been in place since April, but do we have any idea of the percentage of young people we have managed to keep in their families who would perhaps otherwise have gone into care if in that period, if we had not had that service available?
We do. Sorry, I was flicking back to the report. So at the time of writing that report, they'd worked with 14 children on the edge of care, and of those 12 were prevented from coming into care. I do know that since then, one of the children that had come into care has now subsequently gone home and is receiving Educare support again. So of those 14, we have just one child who's come into care and stayed in care as things stand.
Obviously good, very good. And I think obviously it's important to monitor that to see whether that continues to be the case, or whether some of those that we've allowed to continue to remain at home eventually do end up coming into care. But I think it's a very it's a good sort of sign that of what we're doing. The other thing I just wanted to comment was on page 34. You've put that a review of care plans looked after children completed in April 2020 identified a delay in progressing long-term matching decisions, and this was addressed immediately. And I just wonder why it happened in the first place.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, I've done some kind of reflection on this. I think we can see that we weren't giving it the priority that we should have done. So these are children that are settled in their placements with carers, and I guess the risk in that situation is that we focus on those children that aren't, and we need to get that balance right. So we recognise that we should have progressed those two formal decisions. In many cases, that was part of the plan, but it was the part of the plan that social workers weren't necessarily prioritising, and neither were myself or other leaders saying you must prioritise that. So we've changed that. Those children have all now been long-term matched, and quite a number on top of that, and we now have a system in place to make sure that we monitor that very effectively, and we review children who have been in their placement at the 9-month stage and think about whether we should be long-term matching them. If we're unsure if it's the right placement, we will do an assessment and make that decision up front, because I think, again, the risk is that if we're not sure, we wait and see, and we allow children to drift in care instead of at times making the brave decision that it's not the right placement and we don't think it's likely to last through their adulthood, and therefore we should look for an alternative placement in a planned way rather than waiting for it to disrupt and end in a sudden way, which is always difficult for children and everybody else involved.
Anybody got any questions they'd like to ask? Councillor Toynbee.
Yes, thank you, Jill, and thank you I was also going to ask about that issue of delay, so that was really helpful to know that the monitoring systems are in place now to enable us to be more proactive about that. Thank you. I've also just a question about special guardianship orders. When you say foster carers, I think it's at the bottom of page 1, are not willing to agree to an SGO at this time. Is that sort of referring back to what you were saying about that people are now being given more support, because it's a huge decision. Could you just say another few words about that? That would be interesting.
Yeah, certainly. The reasons why some foster carers are reluctant to do that really vary and are often very individual. So when we first started this work, we saw two key themes coming out. One was that they would be disadvantaged financially, and the financial support they received would reduce. So we changed that. And the other issue was around their concern about supporting family time or contact, as you may have heard us talk about it previously, with family members, which can be quite difficult for people to manage. So again, we made changes to that, and our Family Link service now will support family time between SGO carers and other family members where that's needed. And it often isn't, but it provides that reassurance. So that enabled most foster carers to have the reassurance that they needed, alongside some of the other support that we offer. We do still have a few carers who aren't yet reassured of that, and there are lots of issues there. Sometimes it is about a view that the children's needs are very, very high and they need the continued involvement of social workers. That is something we take into account in our assessment. So where we've reached the conclusion that they don't, we genuinely believe that, but carers sometimes aren't of the same view. In some cases, foster carers came in to be foster carers, and actually there's something about being a foster carer and their identity which is important to them. So in some cases that's a factor, and sometimes it's around a particular aspect of the support, and we're looking at how we can negotiate on that and move things forward. So I think for those that aren't willing, there's some who as say have that kind of identity, that view of their own identity. For others, it's often a matter of time and are still keeping those conversations going and just keeping it under regular review. I can see Liz wants to join in.
Liz.
Can I just say that, sorry, I'll say thank you to both of you. I'll say thank you to Liz in advance, but thank you, Jill. That was a really clear, helpful response.
Liz.
Yeah, just to say, I think, the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If somebody has started to care for one of their relatives' children as a foster carer, and the concept of being a special guardian was never introduced to them at the beginning, they've entered into caring for that child as a foster carer. A lot of the instances that Jill and her service have been addressing are asking people who entered into a relationship as a foster carer to now think about being a different form of carer. And that's often quite difficult for people to consider. They're comfortable with the arrangements that are in place and they can't see what the advantage is for them. That's why we have to introduce the concept of being a special guardian at the beginning. And that's why we now have early permanence, initial permanence planning meetings, and have put the additional family support resource into the Child Protection Court Service, so that the discussion can be had at an early stage. So we're not asking somebody to alter the terms of their arrangements 3, 4, 5, 6 years after they were entered into. So some won't change their minds, but new kinship carers, we will be having the conversation about the positives of special guardianship orders at the beginning when they first start to care for their relative's child.
Thank you.
Mr. Pratley.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the report. I found it really interesting, very helpful. The question I have is how does the 32 care order discharges compare to our statistical neighbours? Because in a sense, what I was interested in is whether the gap between us and statistical neighbours is relating to a lack of preventative activity, stopping people coming into care in the first place, or whether it's about the number that we've got at the moment and our ability to discharge.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what we know historically is that we were poor at both ends of business. So so we had more children coming into care than other local authorities, and we had fewer children leaving care than other local authorities. So I think we made progress first on reducing our numbers of children coming into care. And over the last couple of years, really, that had reduced a little. I think this year it will have reduced even more through having ECHO and continuing with some of the other work that we're doing. We won't have up-to-date information on that until the end of this year, this financial year. But we can see there's some data that's shared on that regionally on a quarterly basis, and we can see that we were at least in line with others for children coming into care. Our ambition is to go lower than that, because we know within the West Midlands region there are quite high numbers of looked after children, so we really want to be in the really top area of that, and hopefully below the average within the region. For children leaving care, we're starting to see that increase because it's relatively recently that we're really making some proper headway on that. It's difficult to say how we're doing at this stage. I think as I say, by the end of this financial year we'll get a better picture. But I can see that we're more in the ballpark of others in the region. I think that's the one that we need to again continue to work really hard on.
Yeah, if I may, the West Midlands figures would seem to indicate that we are catching up with the number of young people and children that we exit from the care system. So from a rather low base where other local authorities were actively working to have more children leave the looked after system, we now seem to be catching up. But as we have more in the stock, as it were, as we have more looked after children that we have to consider, could they exit? Even if we catch up with the numbers leaving with statistical neighbours, we will still have greater numbers of looked after children that we have to consider regularly. So we may catch up percentage wise, but to actually catch up and have similar numbers of looked after children, that's a much bigger task. And you'll see in the report there is a comparator between the numbers we would have if we were in line with statistical neighbours, regional neighbours and nationally. So you'll see that the gap there is still high. So we will need to continue with all of this activity in looking at children who we believe could leave the looked after system to reduce that gap. But the percentage of children that we are enabling to leave the looked after system is increasingly in line with statistical neighbours.
Thank you both.
Councillor Howells.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got three questions. One was on the same subject you raised, and Mr. Pratley, excuse me, pretty well answered the question, I think. I was going to say, is it too early yet to see the impact? But clearly we can see the impact it's having on those currently into care, which is really good. And I was going to ask, what's the estimated impact on reducing the numbers so we get back to our statistical neighbours? And you've sort of answered that question in the way that, yeah, we are reducing it, but do we have an objective to say when we would hope to be matching our comparative neighbours in the three comparisons that you showed? So I think it'd be good to know whether there's sort of timescale you put to it to try and achieve that. And my second question, or second and third, was on foster carers. And that was in paragraph 23 and 24. Are there any specific COVID-related safeguarding issues that impact on finding foster carers? So that is it the problem, people coming forward, for example, and we can't provide adequate safeguarding facilities, or simply the numbers of people aren't enough? And so my supplementary question to that is, how far outside Hereford are we looking, and do we feel we need to look forward to find foster carers? Thank you. And thanks for the report, by the way. I thought it was very clear and understandable as well. Very useful.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of comparable numbers, there are lots of factors that can impact on this. In terms of our projections, we always work on a range. On the basis of that, when the placement sufficiency strategy was updated last year, we projected forward and we were looking to be within the region of statistical neighbours by 2024. That's and we're now in a updating those figures kind of routinely. We went higher than we had anticipated when those projections were first made, but we are now about on track. So we really need to see how we're looking at the end of this financial year. But it is going to take time. And we understand that, and we need to absolutely just keep going with all of these plans, and it will change very, quite gradually over that time. In terms of COVID safeguards, so we do know that, and this is true nationally, that many foster carers are older. Many people choose to become foster carers as empty nesters, as you might call them. So when their own children grow up, that's not true of all, but it is true of a sizable proportion of our foster carers. So there's a whole range within that, but some of our carers are older. Some have their own health issues, some of which are significant and put them in quite distinct higher risk categories. So we had to, and they had to, think very carefully about what caring options they offered us during COVID. So there were some who chose to take a break if they didn't have children. There were some who said they weren't open to new placements during that period. And we've obviously worked since the initial lockdown to work through those issues with carers and to help them think about what they can offer. But we still have a small number who haven't wished to offer placements because of the impact of COVID. We also had some teenagers, and I think along with all teenagers, they have struggled more than other groups of children, young people, with the restrictions that come with lockdown. Their friends are incredibly important to them. They want to be out and about. So for some of our teenagers, they really just weren't able or willing to abide by the public health guidance. And while some carers have been able to work with that, others felt that that placed them and their families at too much risk, and that meant that some placements ended. It's been a fairly small number, but it has been a particular stress during the since the pandemic started. We also can see that we put on hold respite arrangements when the first lockdown started because we didn't want children to be moving between homes unnecessarily. We know that IFAs, so independent fostering agencies, did the same, and also they were keeping back respite carers in case main carers became ill with COVID and they needed to move children for a short time. So that meant they were kind of keeping back some placements in a way that they wouldn't have done previously. So that placed some additional pressure on the system. In terms of recruitment, we have seen the number of inquiries and applications continue through the pandemic, and that's really encouraging. I think, much as for many of us, it's kind of been a period of reflection. Lots of people had time that they hadn't had previously. For some people, they've had to think about different work arrangements. So what us and other fostering services have tried to do is say, consider fostering. Is that an option for you? So we've seen a steady stream of applications through the lockdown period. That's continuing. So we're working hard to assess those carers and get them to a point where they can be approved. In terms of our recruitment, so So for our fostering service, we recruit carers from Herefordshire. So every local authority has their own fostering service, and they are all trying to recruit carers in their own areas. We do occasionally recruit a carer just over the border, and we would always talk to them about why they'd chosen to come to Herefordshire, for example, rather than Shropshire or whatever. And we would be looking for a good reason for that, because we don't really want to be, we want local carers. So some of our kinship carers, so family carers, do live outside of Herefordshire, and in that case we would assess potential carers wherever they are, and we have had carers at all sorts of a distance. In terms of independent fostering agencies, our preference is always to place children within Herefordshire, but we absolutely do search on a regional basis and a national basis at times, where that's our kind of only option to find a foster placement. We'd always think very carefully about placing children at a distance, but sadly that is something that we have to do at times. So we do have the ability to search and control the area in which we're searching. Does that answer your questions?
Very thoroughly. Thank you very much, Jill.
Before I call Mike Jones, Chris Baird would like to say a few words, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, colleagues, in the delivery plan of the county plan for the remainder of this financial year, we have an aim that we'll have no more than 320 looked after children by the end of 2021. So, Councillor Howells, that's just to give you we've looked at where we've come from and where we want to get to, and that's the information we put in this year's delivery plan. And also, I think my colleagues Jill Cox and Liz Elgar mentioned, we are facing an increase in the number of children that we are placing in residential provision, and that sadly is because we are left with little option. Either our own foster care or independent foster care in some cases, and that actually is mirrored in a recent survey that was done across a number of local authorities who the county councils network that some councillors may be aware of, where 9 out of 10 councils that responded to that survey were predicting an overspend in children's social care budgets this financial year, and a key part of that was the increasing use of residential placements and the lack of placement choice. So all the things that Jill has been talking about in terms of our work around foster care recruitment and enhancement and looking at what we can do locally is really important for our children in Herefordshire, and that's some of the things we have planned for the next year going on as well. And it'll be good, obviously for scrutiny to see how we're doing in those plans as we take them forward.
Thank you, Chris. Mike.
Okay, thank you, Chair. My question was around the children in residential care. It said in the report there was 43, and 23 of these, over half, were no suitable foster placement could be found. Is that going to be the case long term, and is there no possibility of with these of fostering? What sort of special problems do these children have that no suitable foster carer could be found?
If I may just come in here for a moment. So foster carers can say no. If they will see a profile of a child or young person, and if they are of the opinion that for whatever reason they can't take that child into their home, they don't want to, it will impact on other things within their home, such as the other young people they're caring for, etc. Then that we could not make anybody take a child. We have a very active placements team who search far and wide for carers when we know that we are going to have to find a placement for a child. So you do need to be assured that every effort is made to find an appropriate placement for a child or young person. But as the person who then receives the email saying we cannot find a foster placement for this child. Can you please approve residential? I know of the efforts that are made, extensive efforts made to find a foster placement, but when there aren't any, there is no option than to go to residential. Will that change? I'm not sure. We have to ask ourselves, I suppose, would any of us want to be foster carers? The pros and the cons, the impact it would have on your life, the impact it might have on you when you've raised your own children and are thinking, these are the years I might wish to do other things. The thing that Jill said about, adult children now staying at home for longer, and maybe you don't have that spare bedroom or two. I mean, it would be probably worthwhile talking to some of our foster carers. I know Jill's team do all the time about what are the push and pull factors. We have foster carers leave the service because they become grandparents, and then they offer to care for their grandchildren, which you can't really do while you're also fostering children. So there are a myriad of sort of family reasons. And if you think, your own journeys through adulthood, parenthood, grandparenthood, etc., that can impact upon your availability to be a foster carer. It's really quite it's a big decision to make to be a foster carer. We really do try to support the foster carers that we have, to make sure that we can enable them to carry out their jobs as well as we know they can. But it's a big task to take on, and I think there are a number of reasons why perhaps now it isn't something that as many people may have considered as, say, 30, 40 years ago.
I was wondering whether could I come in, Carol? Is that okay? Yeah, I think to reinforce some of the points that Liz was making, and I think we're very aware really of the impacts on young people really having to move out of the county and go into residential care. Sometimes that isn't great, and we know that we've got a proportion of young people who want to get back to Herefordshire quickly, and I think we've talked about that in previous meetings. I think what we are doing now, we're aware of the challenge, and we are trying to be as proactive as we can in terms of looking at how we might develop the specialist foster carers in-house that would be able to deal with some more of the challenging behaviours that young people are presenting. And we're also trying, I think quite rightly, to learn from others, Carol, in terms of other local authorities that have these similar difficulties, and what can we learn in the way that we promote and develop this type of specialist provision more locally.
Yeah, it was a question I was going to ask really. I mean, the cost of residential care is high, and in some respects it would appear that they've almost got us over a barrel because we can't find foster places for these young people, and they know we can't. Are they, do we tend to, are they spread out, one here, one there, whatever, or are there sort of places where we tend to send them, so we've got more than one in a particular residential accommodation, taking account that some may have physical disabilities that make it very difficult, putting them to one side and looking at the ones that have challenging behaviour problems, and recognising that that probably will continue through this decade and beyond. Have we ever considered whether we should be providing residential accommodation run by Herefordshire Council?
Okay, so in terms of your first question about really where are they, at the moment I don't think we've got any of our children living in the same residential unit as each other currently. There's a whole patchwork of providers. Some of them are very large providers. There's a complicated picture of who owns residential units, and there's some kind of what appear to be quite small providers, but actually they're owned by the same parent company. So there's really quite a mixture there. So we know there are some providers we know more than others, and we always look to the last Ofsted inspection report, we always go out for references so that we're getting an up-to-date picture of the quality of the placement that we're looking to use. What we do know as well is that the standard and quality of those placements can change quite quickly. It often depends on who the registered manager is at a particular time and the staff group that they have at a particular time. So we have some residential providers and placements that we think are providing really excellent care for some of our children and managing some really quite difficult behaviours and supporting those children and young people to really make progress. And we have others that we are more concerned about and aren't always convinced that the quality of care that they're receiving is as good as it should be. So we monitor all of that very carefully, and if we need to move placements, we do. Often I think those placements that are struggling to meet need, they're the ones who would give notice themselves and ask for the child to be moved, because they recognise themselves that they're really struggling to meet the needs of those children. So it's a complicated picture. Most residential units are in quite rural areas. That's often because prices of property are cheaper. So there are lots of residentials in Herefordshire, there's lots in Shropshire, there's a lot, around our region. Equally, there's others that are in more metropolitan areas. So there is an absolute mixture. And one of the things Liz and I were kind of contemplating yesterday is this the picture where we place outside of Herefordshire and other local authorities are placing their children in Herefordshire, and how, whether there's anything we can do to kind of influence that and to start changing that. But it is a very complicated picture. And there were some quite interesting reports published by the Children's Commissioner recently, which I don't know whether any scrutiny committee members have come across, that are really commenting and reviewing the picture of independent fostering and residential provision for children in care. So if you are interested, it's worth just having a look at those. They've just been published in the last couple of weeks. If you have a Google, you would come across them. They're quite readable, but quite interesting. In terms of, I'm sorry, I've completely forgotten your second question.
Building our own children's home.
We've actually considered it. I mean, in my own ward, there is a small residential home for children with challenging behaviour. Those children all come from outside of Herefordshire, and there's not. I don't have a problem with that. Although I have sometimes, it goes up and down. It is what it is. But I just wonder whether, because of the costs and because of wanting to perhaps keep our children in Herefordshire and to try to keep the standard good, because I certainly recognise from what I know that sometimes you get children with challenging behaviours and then you get children with extremely challenging behaviours. You put the two together and it tends that the ones with the challenging behaviours become even more challenging, and that to me is a real worry.
Yeah. Chris, were you looking to respond here? Did I see your hand?
Oh, I was. Yes, we are looking at it, Councillor Gandy. We have in the past, and as you point out, there's a balance between cost, what's provided locally in the market, and what we've used traditionally. We are seeing an increase in the use of residential, and we are using more residential outside of Herefordshire. And there is Liz Elgar is looking with colleagues at that aspect, given that there's a number of residential providers in county. What more could we do in terms of working with them? And then again, we have done that in the past, but it's right that we look at that again, particularly as you say, Councillor Gandy, they are often educating, supporting and caring children from other local authority areas. It is a specialised business running a residential care home for children. You know, and there's a lot to consider, a lot of regulation, a lot of issues around compliance, health and safety, quite rightly, you know, and recruitment of staff, good quality staff and retention of staff. And if you think you almost need to have a 3-shift system to operate 24 hours, you know, there is a lot to consider. We do commission those places, as you know, through contracts to the independent sector, but so there's a lot to be mindful of and to take a look at, and we are, you know, reviewing that. That's part of our work and improvement plan, is to take a real detailed look and see whether it makes sense for us as a council to run a children's home direct, and what it might be, because obviously there's a whole range of children's needs, and you know, they are usually, as you say, councillor, the care is grouped around certain groups of needs, and one of the issues for us traditionally has been we have a relatively small number, and you wouldn't place a child with certain needs with a child with another needs, you know, across a range of disabilities, for example. So yeah, all those things we need to consider, but we are actively now looking at that.
Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just we welcome the reduction in numbers of looked after children from 350 to 336, and Chris just mentioned a target earlier of 320 for this 2021. I wondered, is that ambitious enough, given that we've taken on 20 new qualified social workers, and the tremendous work the early help assessment is doing? I just wonder, should we be looking higher than that?
We are in the longer term, councillor, but as colleagues have said, you know, it is an approach which we have to consider carefully for the children and also their own individual circumstances, and it does go through the courts as well. So as Jill said, you know, we have cases moving through the courts, so that takes its own timescales. Yeah, the 20 newly qualified social workers, they're working in a range of teams, and that's really important because it does reduce our reliance on agency social workers. So it does contribute and will contribute to our improvements, but it's not directly related, you know, in a complete cause and effect, if you see what I mean, to fewer children who are looked after by us. And I think also we do need to be mindful of emerging pressures as well. So it's really good, isn't it, that the council's now got a range of preventative services and capacity in different areas. It's fantastic. You know, it's great to be working in Herefordshire as part of that. But the impact of the pandemic and what's happening for families, we're only just starting to see, and will emerge over the next few months, and I would say into next year and beyond. And you know, a recession, and this is, you know, the Bank of England said, is this it's the worst recession in 300 years. Recessions often bring with them increased need and increased demand on services for vulnerable children and families, and we just need to be mindful and work through that when we're looking at these targets as well. You know, we haven't got a crystal ball, but I am aware that, you know, nationally, and if you read some of the comments from the children's commissioners in their reports and Ofsted's, I think, annual report today, there is an emerging, you know, areas of concern and pressure for support for vulnerable children and families.
Can I just comment before I come on to Mr. Pratley that Kate is having to leave us to attend another meeting. I'd like to thank her for being here, and just to say that Kim Gaffey, who's from Legal Services, will continue to remain in the meeting. But thank you, Kate, for attending. Mr. Pratley.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask this question under the next item, but given that that Chris Baird has just talked about the impact of the pandemic, I wondered if I could ask it now. And it's essentially, what additional funding is the council able to get access to? And is there any plan to to pass some of that funding on to community organisations to really help with the huge increase in impact that the pandemic is having on some of our most troubled families.
Should I
Yes, please.
respond? Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. It's a developing picture, Mr. Pratley, as I think you might be aware. There's things like the Hardship Fund, which has received national attention. There's discussions about how children will be supported through, and families through, holiday schemes, for example. But that comes in from next Easter, and we wait further details, and things like that will absolutely, the community, voluntary, independent sectors will all be part of that available offer of funding to support that. There are other, I suppose, if we use the term all age funding, if that's the right term, in terms of what government has said, and they've also said there's funding being released to local authorities for COVID-19, some of which we still don't know the details of. And I know my colleague Andrew Lovegrove is keeping a close eye on that, and then through Cabinet, they'll look to try and see how money is best used, and that doesn't automatically mean, of course, that it's used through council services. But at the same time, councils up and down the country, and this isn't unique to Herefordshire, are facing huge multi-billion-pound shortfalls, aren't they, in terms of local government financing? So trying to navigate what will be available and what will be available for next financial year is tricky. The Cabinet and Council will have its budget consultation as part of that, and some of that will be informed by what government grants are available. And within children's, we've had the announcement that the Troubled Families Grant will be available for next year. There's meant to be further details on that. I know we're going through a commissioning exercise, for want of a better word, and we're going to talk about that, I think, in the new year. So where we can, we want to be working with other organisations and supporting them. But in terms of specific amounts of money, it is difficult to say. And particular amounts, things like the Troubled Families Grant, we can now say with a greater degree of certainty than we could 3 weeks ago, but it is only for 1 year again. So it is a huge issue, isn't it, for organisations that want to work with the council and want to have some certainty and some clarity about funding, not just for next year, but the years after.
Could I comment on that? I think because it's a great question, really. So we know from the spending review, no, there's not a lot of money really in the system at the moment, specifically for adult and children. So they've announced an extra 350 million, I think, for adults and children. There are other bits that Chris was talking about, but it is going to be challenging, absolutely.
Can I was going to raise it at the end of the next item, but I'll raise it now really, because it seems appropriate. The council will be going through its obviously budget consultation over the next few months, ready to set the precept. And I realise this is perhaps difficult, but if the council took the decision to reduce the money going into Children's and Families Directorate, or expected significant savings from you, what would be the potential impact upon your service and the progress that you've made in the last 2 years?
I mean, there's obviously a consultation process to go through, Councillor, so I don't want to preempt that. The work that things like the Edge of Care service and early help and the increasing staffing and capacity around that to enable good quality social work, and the wider support that we put in place, not just trying to and actually succeeding in recruiting some permanent social workers and more, but also around business support and family support. We developed that proposal and got a lot of support from cabinets past and present. It really was across party, if I can say that without being political, you know, a real focus on children, hasn't it been? And that kind of programme of improvement was developed looking at what other local authorities have in place, you know, to achieve good quality social work. And if we didn't have those things in place, you know, I'd be very fearful that we would be back into the cycle, which, if you look over well, the last 12 years, to be honest with you, Herefordshire has been in, where it has been, you know, from the external regulators position, judged inadequate, comes out, requiring improvement, then back, and then out, and we've got a real opportunity, and it is, so much has been achieved actually over these past 18 months, and we've set our aspirations really high, you know. And if you think of some of the targets, and we do talk about that, don't we, in scrutiny and performance challenge, whether some of our targets are they seem too high, but it is about that aspiration for children, and so I think you know, it wouldn't serve anyone well if I said, oh well, yes, if we removed some of the things we've only just put in place, then we would carry on and it would be fine. It wouldn't be, you know, in my view. But what we can do, and some of the things we've talked about, is support children at the right time with the right resource in the right place. You know, and that means supporting children to be with their families or extended families, to support children in foster care where they, you know, would benefit from that, to not be looked after where they would benefit from that, to yeah, so, and those things, if we do that, we'll actually release some money as well, councillors. And if you think of the Wide Marsh Street, which some of you have seen, that has reduced the amount of money the council is spending on that provision because we're able to do it locally. So that's great. And the response on the Echo service as well, you know, that, so we can say that, you know, in terms of savings, we should be, and you know, I've talked with Liz and Andy and the senior management team about that. We are committed to do that, you know, as officers on behalf of the cabinet, because that's the right thing to do for children, and it will also reduce the costs. So, you know, I think that kind of thing is where we should be focusing our attention. Some of the things around support and direct work, you know, we need to maintain, in my view.
Liz.
Yes, if I could say, please, we will always bring children into care. We won't stop doing that. And I'm mindful of a Ofsted focused visit on one of our West Midlands colleagues, only that their report was released, I think, on Monday, and they were criticised and said, and I quote, some children remain in harmful situations for too long. So we have to have the balance right. We cannot just focus on, let's not take children into care, let's not take children into care. If a child is experiencing significant harm, we have to act, we have a duty to act. But the crux of the matter then is avoiding drift and delay. So I think I've seen reference to drift and delay in the 2012 Ofsted report in Herefordshire, probably 2014, and it occurred again in 2018. That's where we've got to focus efforts, that if we have a child in our care for whatever reason, and we've met that threshold of significant harm, and the court has acknowledged that that's the case, our planning for that child then has to be of top quality. It has to be timely. And we have to front load that. And that's where I would say a lot of the changes that we've made have been to try and front load. So identify kinship carers earlier, put family support in earlier, bring the Echo service in earlier, or everything we're trying to do earlier. My own opinion, if we stopped doing that, or if we stopped that journey of front loading, we would go back to seeing drift and delay, is my opinion. And I personally think, you know, the harm to children who experience drift and delay, it's immeasurable. Just, you know, in a system, not knowing what their final plan is, what their future is going to be. We have to avoid that at all costs. It's just not fair on children. It's not fair on their families. So I feel that the changes that we've made, it is to enable children to remain with their families where it is safe to do so. But it is also in acknowledgement of where that isn't possible, we act swiftly and in a timely and appropriate manner to have a clear plan for a child so they have some security. We've seen a lot of that happening with the use of pre-proceedings, the initial permanency planning meetings, review permanency planning meetings. That's all now bedding in. And if that were now either stopped or slowed down, I think that would be, it'd be awful. Actually, I can't think of another word other than awful, is my opinion.
Thank you. Andy?
Yeah, just so I don't know whether I can get away with saying I'm a new boy anymore, but I'm sort of 7.5 months, 8 months in. I think one of the things that, and I wouldn't say that if I didn't believe it, that has impressed me, I think, about Herefordshire has been the political commitment to the transformation programme. And folks, it is a transformation programme. This is not about continuing the yo-yo effect that Chris talked about. It's about sustaining the improvements over time. And we know that that's probably going to take up to 5 years to actually get to that point. That isn't to say, you know, we're not doing stuff today and tomorrow. So I think we have to hold our nerve. I really do believe we are doing the right things and we are putting the money in the right areas to get the best outcomes for children and young people. And to specifically answer your question, I mean, if there were significant cuts, that would significantly undermine our ability to move at pace and in a consistent way. And the other challenge, as you will you'll know, is if, God forbid, we did get a poor Ofsted judgment, that costs
huge
a lot of money. You know, I was talking to Chris, I won't name names, but there was one local authority that isn't too far away from here, where it cost them over £10 million just to get back on track.
That's cheap.
Doing the first things, because what happens obviously is all your good staff leave because they don't really want to work for you know, local authority that's got a poor Ofsted rating, and I could go on. It's quite perverse, really. But so I think I do feel we are doing the right things. We are investing the money in the right areas, and we are spending it wisely. I think the commitment to this single practice approach is pivotal to that, because we're shining this big light on what good looks like and our expectations of staff and what good outcomes look for children and families of Herefordshire.
Thank you. Okay. Felicity, would you like to say anything before I've got no other people to speak, so would you like to say anything before we go through?
Yes, please, I absolutely would. I've been itching to get in here, but I'm glad in a way that we gave the officers a chance to speak, because I think they've really eloquently and very passionately, you know, made clear how important the direction we're going in is, the new measures, new ways of working and so on. And it's really heartening to hear that. Absolutely, we cannot step back. We cannot stop what we're doing. We cannot make cuts in the sense of stopping doing things. I think what Chris mentioned is that we are investing in a range of measures which could be called spend to save, if you like, which will hugely benefit our children, but will in the long run also save money, which is good news in that respect. But I think we're also, and we have to keep reminding ourselves of the untold damage that is done or was done when cuts were made, whether it's locally here in Herefordshire or in other areas where we've seen it happen. Absolutely devastating, and we cannot possibly, you know, even consider those options. I think thankfully the Cabinet recognises that and is behind this, and they know they've got to make savings. We've got this horrendous business of COVID, massive spend on COVID, and possibly up to 16 million that we've got to look for. It varies all the time because government chops and changes, and we hear about a certain amount of funding and then it, you know, and then we hear about more. So it's very difficult to get the complete picture. But I do feel that, you know, Cabinet is very, very keen that we support the very positive stuff that is happening at the moment, and that it would be counterproductive in every sense, very bad for our children, but also would cost money in the long run. I think that's the other side of it we have to remember. So very quickly on the report itself, thank you, Jill. I thought that was a very clear report, very clearly presented as well. And it is encouraging, I think, that the numbers are coming down. Can't get complacent, as we know. It's sort of down and then up a bit and then down, but the trend seems to be down for the range of reasons we've heard. Some of it children going back to families or into different arrangements, some of it actually being able to anticipate and reduce the number of children actually coming into care. So that is very heartening to see. And as also been mentioned, measures to improve recruitment and retention of foster carers themselves. That's obviously a very difficult area for all sorts of reasons, people retiring, as we've heard, but also COVID and health and so on and so on. So what we can do to, to really push forward on recruitment in a positive way is great. And the measures being brought forward to further improve the fees and allowances that we offer our foster carers, we hope will also help. But I just also wanted to, just a note of, caution, I suppose, in many ways. Chris mentioned future needs. We simply can't anticipate them in any specific way. We know they're likely to come forward. We know that COVID's having an enormous impact on everyone, really, all of us probably, but particularly on more vulnerable families and children. And so, we simply have to be prepared that for possible further need that we perhaps haven't sort of got on our radar at the moment, but could be coming along. Yes, thank you so much, everybody. Great questions as always, and it's opened up a really interesting discussion and, opportunity to feel a little bit further into some of the issues which are part of this whole picture. So many thanks.
Thank you, Felicity. Matt, do we have any recommendations?
I picked up two potential recommendations from the debate. One was that the committee supports the continued monitoring of the number of children who have been prevented from entering care by the Edge of Care service. And there might be another recommendation around an update next year on work that's being taken forward around the reduction of children looked after.
Could I float another one, which is that we urge the Cabinet and officers to look at whether it would be financially and also beneficial to our young people to consider providing residential care within Herefordshire run by Herefordshire Council. Do I have a seconder for that recommendation? Yes. Although, do we have to go to a breakout, or can I do it by hands?
If possible, can we have a proposer and seconder for all three recommendations?
All right.
I think that would be.
Well, I'll propose all three. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Paul Andrews. All those in favour?
Okay, then we will need to do the electronic voting system.
Okay. So those non-met voting members will now to be put into the breakout room. And the number of voting members to be confirmed.
Chair, there are 5 voting members and they may vote now. Those have been approved unanimously, Chair.
Thank you. If we could now bring back the non-voting attendees to the meeting. Thank you. Doesn't even give you a chance to get a cup of tea, does it? Right, we now move on to item 8, which is the review of performance and progress against the Safeguarding and Family Support Improvement Plan. And I believe this will be presented by Andy. Thank you. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Got it.
Okay.
Right, we're there. Let me just bring my report up. Yeah, so Carol, myself and Liz are going to do a bit of a double act, and we're conscious, obviously, of time, and we'd welcome any specific issues or questions to come from members as well. So, in a timely way, we're continuing with the use of a front sheet. So, if you're looking at the improvement plan and the Q2 update, I'm hoping that you're getting familiar with this way of laying out things in terms of an overview around what is actually going well in terms of our improvement plan, what we're worried about, and what actions we've taken to address some of those issues, but also actions that we're taking in quarter three. So I'll just pick out a few from each area. So in terms of what's going well, we're being, I think I've said to you before about how we're trying to shift towards looking at the quality of practice and how we do that through robust audit. And the picture there is an encouraging one. So if you look at where we were this time last year in terms of the percentage of audits that were judged to be good, we were around 11%, and now we're up to around, I think it's 35%. So that's really telling you something meaningful in terms of triangulating that with looking at the timeliness, for instance, of our work in terms of seeing children and completing assessments. So the quality picture is stacking up as well. So, but we know we're not complacent on that. We know we have to continue to look at how we learn from audit and put that into practice to drive the judgments up increasingly in the right direction. In terms of children's participation in their looked after reviews, that's up to 95%, so that's brilliant. We're making inroads in terms of child protection inquiries that historically have just resulted into no further actions in terms of statutory work. So I guess that's our worst. At the end of last year, we were about 80% of no further action. We're down to 46%. That I can tell you that's come down even further in terms of the current quarter that we're in. The outcomes for care leavers are good to outstanding in terms of education, employment, and training, keeping connected with our young people, as well as them being in suitable accommodation. We've mentioned about the recruitment of the 20 permanent newly qualified social workers, who I've have to say, in terms of this cohort, have been fantastic. I mean, we had when we were doing our launch of Signs of Safety, 2 of the newly qualified social workers presented at that and how they were using Signs of Safety into practice. It was phenomenal, really. And then the end of last week, we celebrated Black History Month, and then I think there was 5 newly qualified social workers who actually organised that very, very well. So in terms of our worries, we've still got a challenge around staff supervision. That had fallen to 74%. We're doing work at the moment to actually actively address that. The Essex diagnostic work revealed certain strengths in our assessment service, but also highlighted that we need to do more in terms of better quality analysis of children's need, and how that obviously translates to how we care and support young people. Yes, performance around children missing from home, the timeless return to home interviews, that's not been great, but if we get time, we can talk just a bit about what we've been doing to address that one specifically. And then the final worry was around repeat referrals into MASH, which was as high as 30% for 1 month in this particular quarter. So that's children and families actually keep coming back into our system, as it were. In terms of actions where we've taken over the quarter in terms of Q2, what we've done this time is just to so that's a looking back and now putting it in the context of what we've actually done in terms of the quarter. You'll see a list of the particular actions that we've actually completed on, and I think that's important in terms of scrutiny, really, that you're aware that we are actually carrying through and learning as a consequence of certain key actions. And then looking forward in terms of Q3, if you go to the next page, we're doing a lot of work around implementing a review around our child exploitation service. So specifically, that's about getting more fit for purpose systems and processes in place to reduce drift and delay around risk assessments. For instance, some of our performance measures and targets actually weren't comparable to our comparators, so we were setting ourselves up to fail a bit on that. So we've done some good work actually making sure that that's more focused and realistic. The head of the child exploitation service is really keen also not only to look at process and activity measures, but also to look specifically at how we might have more outcome focused measures linked to the impact of the child exploitation service in terms of keeping children and young people safe. We've done a really good piece of work around, which sort of links to the previous discussion around looking at whether there was a group of children that we could more actively look at to achieve family reunification. So myself, Jill and Liz, we went through quite a large cohort of children and young people where that could be a possibility, and we identified a small cohort where we're going to do some concerted work looking at family reunification, and we've got a review meeting planned, I think, for the next 2 weeks, just to take stock on some of the themes that came out of that family reunification work. Yes, and and Liz will talk a bit more about this, but we've really attended well, I think, to some of the learning and messages back from the Essex diagnostic work in terms of assessment and how we could develop, analytical skills within our social work staff working in that particular area, and then that's led to quite a significant practice development plan in which the Social Work Academy are going to be quite actively involved in that as well, linked to some of the work we've been doing around signs of safety. So taking the signs of safety approach and looking at how staff within the assessment service can actually use that in terms of the way that they analyse need and risk, so that we get better, more focused care plans as a consequence of that. Liz, is there anything else that you want to highlight in terms of that cover sheet?
No, Andy, I think you've covered everything off. Thanks.
Great. And then obviously beneath that, you've got all the detail in terms of a particular activity through the quarter and obviously the key priorities. What we're trying to do here is to, through the front sheet, just to highlight some of the key bits, but just to reassure you as you go through the pages of the improvement plan, you'll see that there's dedicated action going on across the particular areas of development.
Thank you, Andy. Before I open it up to the members, I think first of all we need to be aware that this obviously this data goes up to the end of September, so it's about 8 weeks now.
Yeah.
Since, this data was brought forward, and we have talked in our pre-meeting about how we can perhaps go after the next municipal year, find a way of getting our meetings much closer to when your information becomes available, to make it a much more relevant to the actual the information. There's two things I just wanted to raise. The document, the front document, talks about Doncaster and Essex. Don't much about Doncaster other than my brother lives not far from there, but Essex is somewhere I was born, so I know Essex is nothing like Herefordshire, and it is an enormous county. But what specifically do Doncaster and Essex do that makes them such an important partner peer review type group for us?
Well, I think Doncaster, and Liz will know this more, is more of a relationship that we had a number of years ago. That relationship, I think, is now finished. So we're just purely working with Essex. Essex have gone on a similar improvement journey to us. It took them 5 years to get from inadequate to outstanding, where they are now. Actually, it was longer than that. They're classed as a partner in practice, as a positive example from government, if you like, supported by the DfE, as a local authority that has the credibility and the skills to work alongside the likes of ourselves to, I guess, share some of that experience and to support us in our improvement work. Specifically, they've been doing a host of things. So they've been doing diagnostic work. So, you know, that we hold up the mirror to Essex, they come in and dispassionately take a look at what they're finding in terms of progress, all the way through to what we're doing literally within the next couple of weeks, where they're coming in to work with the Science and Safety team on a reflective supervision, because you'll know from Ofsted there have been issues around supervision not being at the right quality, not enough about reflecting on practice and more process driven. So they're going to be doing a series of workshops for all the managers, and we'll be working with them to support them. Again, that's about sharing their experience and their knowledge and experience with ourselves to help us with our improvement work. But Liz, you're close to Essex.
Chris has got his name up, hand up first. Chris?
Yes, I'll do a pass the parcel if I may, Chair, and pass on to Liz. But just to set the context, because obviously we've been doing this a lot longer than you know, Andy, as Andy said, he's arrived in March. This was taking place. Really, the first conversations I had with the DfE were back in 2018. Partners in Practice is a nationally accredited system of sector-led improvement, and whereby some local authorities that are judged outstanding put themselves forward to be approved by DfE, and you know, they went through a selection process and they get funded from the DfE to do this. And different local authorities, as I think Andy was mentioning, really have different skills. So it's not that all local authorities work in the same way or on the same issues. When we had the inspection in 2018, you know, it was very clear, and it built on some of the LGA review work that we'd had done earlier in the year about some of our clear deficits and things that needed to be put right. And so we were talking to the DfE, myself and Liz, about what would be the most appropriate partner. And Doncaster was put forward, particularly around performance culture and IRO service. So you're quite right, councillor, you know, chalk and cheese, isn't it? Doncaster and Herefordshire in one sense, but in another it was, what are the issues that we're facing? Where's the expertise that could come in and have a look? And that was reflected really, I think we've talked in previously in earlier iterations of scrutiny, haven't we, about that? And then Ofsted also recognised the Doncaster findings as well. But we were looking more for a long-term partner really, and Essex, you know, to address some of our issues around culture and practice. And you know, they had been on this journey. It was more than 5 years, but they had been on this journey from inadequate. And one of the great things about it has been, you know, some colleagues from Essex talking about how they have been with Essex through that journey. And I think for our staff, that's a powerful thing. You know, it's not, consultants have their place, but they're not consultants or agency workers or whatever coming in and saying do this and then they've given their input and they've left. Actually, Essex has staff who've stuck with over the years, and now they're sharing their support and knowledge with us. So we had quite a, you know, we could choose to an extent who we worked with, if you see what I mean, out of a menu. And then Liz did a lot of work on the detail. So if I then use that as a kind of pass on to her because, you know, there is a lot of detail work behind it to get the best out of it, really.
Liz.
Yeah, thank you. Well, to be honest, I'd already got some links with Essex, as they were the improvement partners in Birmingham. And when we, as Chris said, we had people to choose from who we would like to forge a relationship. I was very well aware that they work with the local authority, that they're helping to bring about improvement, and their approach, I think, the approach I was expecting them to adopt, they have, and it has been very well received. And we've had reports back that actually people have quite liked taking part with Essex in the diagnostics and are very receptive to the feedback. It enables us to know whether we are judging things correctly, and it's been really heartening that everything Essex have said we sort of already knew, but that's good, because if they were raising things with us that we had no clue about, we'd have to start thinking, well, what are we looking at? Because if we can't see what they're seeing, there must be something wrong. So I think it gives us the confidence that we know our services well, and we know what needs to improve. I think that there is a lot of merit in people hearing that sometimes from somebody rather more objective. So rather than thinking, oh, here goes Liz banging on again about things, they will be hearing Essex giving them constructive feedback.
You know.
And I feel sometimes I give constructive feedback, but don't always think it's received as constructive feedback. Whereas when Essex give constructive feedback, it's received in that way, which is fabulous. I don't care how we get the message across, as long as we get the message across. So that's really positive. They have been very receptive to doing things which they haven't done with other local authorities. So coming back and doing a review of the court and CP service. So you'll recall they completed a diagnostic of that in November of last year. They came back in August to look at it again, to give us the feedback of whether it had declined, stayed the same, or improved. We were heartened to hear that in their opinion it had improved. That's really positive. So we want to continue with this relationship with them, because we would like them to come and carry out some more diagnostics. We would like them to carry out some diagnostics of our 16+ service, our contextualised safeguarding service, and our fostering service. We would like them to possibly offer a mentor to a couple of members of staff who we think could benefit from that. And we would like them to come back in probably 7 to 8 months time and view the assessment service and the looked after children service and MASH, which they've done their diagnostics on between August and the beginning of November. So again, we can get some objective, impartial feedback on whether the improvements that they identified would benefit our services. Have they been put into place? And it's nice to be able to have a conversation with someone who can recall when they came 8 months ago, rather than somebody new who, you know, that start again syndrome. So and you know, if you read their Ofsted inspection report, I mean, it's just glowing. So if we can learn from them and take some of their advice and also use the advice we have, because I don't want any of you to think that Chris, Andy and I don't have ideas and we have to always go somewhere else to get them. We absolutely do have ideas, but we don't know everything. So it's just helpful, I think, if we can continue to work and maintain that relationship and build on it as we go forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, and what I've liked, Carol, is they really are keen to work alongside us. So they're quite flexible, really, in terms.
People are like that. Essex people are.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose to add that, and you know, one of the things, because they don't use signs of safety, for example, but in the work around supervision, they've recognised that we do, and you know, they're taking that on board in how they work with us. So again, that's good, isn't it? You know, it's not like, oh, it's the Essex way or bust. And it's good that, you know, Andy and Liz have been able to work with them to develop that.
And am I right in saying, I mean, we in our pre-meeting, we talked about signs of safety, and I mentioned the fact that, you know, we're hoping to have a sort of presentation for all councillors, which, because not all of my committee were invited to that signs of safety. We also wondered whether it would be possible for our two co-opted members of the committee to also attend the signs of safety workshop, because I don't know the legals around that, but perhaps we could think about that. But am I right that we're doing some work with Worcestershire, aren't we, regarding signs of safety?
Yeah, we've got that connection. They're part of within the signs of safety community. Sounds all very grand. There is a regional network, and we're active participants in that regional network. Includes Worcestershire, and it was really pleasing that the signs of safety lead from Worcestershire very generously came and spoke at our launch events as well to share their experience. So I think the more, again, we can reach out and do learning, particularly across the region with our colleagues, the better.
Yeah. And just one other question. At the cabinet meeting, there was a recommendation from cabinet that scrutiny look at the issue of what are the barriers to dealing with issues regarding mosaic, and whether mosaic was causing some of the criticism that was made regarding the peer-on-peer review, which was around information not being recorded, and for us to look at the barriers that were there. Now, looking at the report, the performance report that you've put forward, there are a number of areas where you talk about mosaic and work you are doing with mosaic to improve the way that things are recorded, and giving early help the opportunity to work with mosaic, etc. And I just wondered whether at this stage you think that what was being asked of us by the cabinet is already covered by the improvement plan, or whether you think we could consider, because of that recommendation, we should perhaps be considering covering in the improvement plan a greater sort of detail about what we are doing to improve mosaic, because I'm not sure whether a separate scrutiny meeting or task and finish is really actually the appropriate thing.
I agree. Well, I'll speak on that one. I mean, I think in terms of the specific work we're doing around mosaic, we'll cover off some of the system side issues. So in terms of good information sharing. So one of the things that the practitioners are really welcoming is from December the 7th, we're switching on something called group sharing, which enables better connectivity between cases, for instance. So we could create a name for a particular group that would look at connections that young person, for instance, would have with other family members, other family networks. And so we're better able to track things. So we're already looking at whether through that particular function we might be able to look in a more sophisticated way, looking at child exploitation, because as you well know, young people are connected to other young people that may be at risk. So it will certainly help us in terms of understanding things like county lines, for instance. So I think, yeah, I mean, I think that the changes that we're making to the system, we're actually switching on that particular function, as I've just said, on December the 7th, will definitely help in terms of information sharing and keeping connected to networks, if you like, in terms of young people potentially at risk. Is that clear?
Yeah, it is clear. I mean, are we saying, before I come to Liz, are we saying basically that Mosaic has the facilities, we don't necessarily use all of them?
Yeah, well, go on, Liz, you go.
I think we'd have to know what the specific situation is. We won't record information on a child's file if that case is not allocated to a social worker. So that's the first thing. We will never have a system that records everything about every child in Herefordshire. So if a case has been open to a social worker but is closed, and then something happens, that won't be recorded on a file unless the case is reopened because there's an issue which warrants the case to reopen. So I think that's the first point that I just need to make. The second is, whatever system you have, whether it be Liquid Logic or Care First or Mosaic, you will only get out of it what people put into it. If somebody doesn't record something, you could have every system in the world, but it won't be recorded because we are dependent upon the human being, i.e. the social worker or family support worker, whoever the case is open to record that information into the system. My opinions, Essex say Mosaic is clunky, but as we've said before, you go to where they use Care First, people will not like that. You'll go to somewhere where they use Liquid Logic, some people won't like that. What we need to do is we need to emphasise the importance of proportionate, concise case recording, but we also just need people to be aware that not everything will be recorded if the case isn't allocated and open. It wouldn't be right to start putting information onto files of cases that are closed. So I just wanted to make that point, if I may.
Chris?
Oh, hello. Yes. I mean, I think what we can do, scrutiny colleagues, is as part of our improvement plan, report on how we're enabling good social work through the use of our electronic systems. So, I'm mindful that we've talked about Otter, for example, and we do have some examples of that saving time, but also we're doing some more work to make it more consistent. And that is part of our improvement approach and should enable better recording. And within signs of safety, we've got a whole range of changes that are going live from January in Mosaic to support the implementation of signs of safety. And I think we should be being clear with scrutiny and the cabinet member at the very least, obviously, about what those improvements are, and are they making a tangible difference for children by enabling better practice, a tool for better practice. We're also doing some work on more succinct recording. So there are elements that I think we can, provide you with information as part of our reporting on the improvement plan that then you could have a look at and then, see whether that satisfies, your ability to exercise scrutiny, or whether you want anything more. And that may be the first step, Chair, rather than, as you say, a bespoke task and finish. But recording has been something for us for a number of years. Our audit work shows that it is improving, but there is other things that we need to do. And also, sometimes we've looked back at records wanting things to be recorded, but at the time the system isn't there to record it. Whereas now we are recording things in a different way. So, there are different aspects to an answer, if you see what I mean, without trying to fudge it. But I think in terms of the, scrutiny around supporting systems to enable good social work and good recording, that's something we have in our improvement plan, but we can make more explicit in terms of what are we doing, how effective is it, notwithstanding Liz's point as well that we are working with human beings.
Yeah, can I just sort of pick up on that point, Carol, briefly? So over the last, I think about 10 months, we've actually had a project set up just to review Mosaic to ensure that it can be the most practice-friendly system that we can develop on the back of implementing signs of safety. The worst systems, Carol, are those that are so clunky, so bureaucratic, that drive the practice. What we want is a system that supports signs of safety, supports the practice. And when we go live on January the 25th with a fair wind, we will actually be doing that. So we've reviewed all the forms. We've tried to strip out some replication. I was talking about our group sharing. Why we brought that in was we were having social workers were cutting and pasting basic information from one child's record into another. Group share enables us to pre-populate that basic information, so social workers aren't having to spend valuable time that they could be spending, visiting children and families, in terms of just putting information in a repetitious way into the system. So we've done a huge amount of work on Mosaic around that, and we've got good people working on it. But I'm in favour of what Chris was saying. I think it would be useful for scrutiny to look at that, look at the implementation, look at the impact of it. Are we addressing any particular concerns or issues that are coming out of us going live with that new system from the end of January?
Thank you. Diana.
Yeah, thank you, Chris and Andy. That's really helpful. That I agree with what's been said about I think we can feed back to the executive that their request for us to look at barriers to recording. We'll make sure it's embedded in improvement plans, and B, it sounds like a good idea to do what Andy just suggested as new systems are coming into place. So that sounds very timely. And I mean, in the context of sexual exploitation, which was the context in which the executive made this request, I think what almost worries me more than barriers to recording is barriers to reporting. And that becomes an absolutely huge societal issue beyond our control. But I'd be interested at some time to know if there's anything we can do about that, because that is worrying. While I'm on, can I ask a question about the improvement plan, Carol?
Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah, I was just, I know it's nearly 3 o'clock, but just specifically about MASH at the top of page 5 of the improvement plan, about under the actions, about recording domestic abuse notifications, not recorded as MASH contacts. Is that because we think we ought to record things even if they don't seem extremely serious, but that they're not a MASH contact because they don't meet a certain threshold or something?
So they're not a MASH contact because they don't go into MASH.
Yeah.
They go into the domestic abuse hub. So there are three places now that things that are received into business support. Things don't come directly into MASH. Things never did. They all came into an email receiver. I don't know what you call it. And then they would all get sent to MASH. And that was why MASH was completely overwhelmed. So what happens now is the DA notifications come in and they all go to the domestic abuse hub. The early help, the requests for an early help service come in and go to the early help hub. And the MARFs that are identified as a level 4 issue go to MASH. So so what you would see on the October scorecard, which I don't think you've had yet because I think September scorecard is embedded in, but we've now got October scorecard. So we will report on every month the number of contacts received, but then tell you where those contacts went to, whether it be the early help hub, the domestic abuse hub, or into MASH. And the serious domestic abuse incidents that meet level 4 of our threshold document, the police send those immediately to MASH. They don't go the domestic abuse hub route. And if anybody wanted to go and observe how the domestic abuse hub operates at any point, please do let me know, because you're very welcome to have a look at that.
I'd really encourage that, and Councillor Toynbee's quite right about the you know, coming forward with you know, the kind of reporting, as she says, not the and that is a bit you know, a huge issue for us across all ages, isn't it? You know, in terms of sexual violence and sexual abuse. The domestic abuse hub is in place, but a relatively recent development. So again, it's another example of things that we've put in place and is multidisciplinary, but it's a good step for Herefordshire again, you know, to have that now in place and to have that available, as well as MASH, as well as the early help hub, you know.
If I may say as well, I'm pretty sure, I'm sure, in saying that if any of you wanted to observe the Prevent and Disrupt group, which is the group that manages, if you like, all the intelligence around exploitation. Andy leads the contextualised safeguarding service, and I'm sure that people would be, you know, if you've had your DBS checks and what have you, would be able to observe a Prevent and Disrupt group, so you can see how we're managing all the intelligence that's gathered regarding sexual and criminal exploitation of young people across Herefordshire.
Yeah, no problem at all. That if you want to contact me, I can facilitate that. But Carol, you said about a presentation or a mini workshop on signs of safety. I'll take that away and organise that for the new year if people are interested in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be part of our all-member
Yeah.
programme, Andy. For that, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Philip.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for a comprehensive report. Quite a lot of detail to read. I picked up in particular on paragraphs 38 and 39 about consultees. Some of this might be my lack of total understanding, so it might just be explaining that to me. But it seemed to me it's a question about proactive and reactive feedback from children in care. Mosaic, I get the impression, is a reactive. That is, we go and talk to young people, record what they tell us, and then put that into the database. But there was something you mentioned in that paragraph about Mind on My Own app. And I had lots of questions about that. That suggested to me that was a more proactive system where young people could, when they were motivated to, give some feedback without being prompted to by specific meetings. So my question was, is that the case? Is it actually an online app? How long ago was it developed? It's not mentioned anywhere else, so I was looking for it. And so that's why all these questions came up. Is it actually a mobile app, as the word implies? How long ago was it developed? Is it a platform that all young people and children can use? Because that strikes me as an issue, that they'll have different ways of being able to produce feedback. So is it the same across age groups? As a result, do we see any increase in proactive feedback, which you would hope would happen, or is it still essentially a prompt service for young people to give their feedback? It would strike me that it would actually be easy to build a database, because obviously if they're feeding information in themselves, that's high quality data, and therefore wouldn't mean waiting time for care workers to enter it, and also it would be their own data. And are we going to rely on this for increasingly for feedback, or as well as, I presume, as well as face-to-face? And what's the impact on COVID? Do we get more responses? Is it easy to respond? It's a lot of questions, but having read that one bit of information, questions came to mind, and I found nothing else.
Yeah, I'll have a go, and then I'm sure Liz will comment. To be honest with you, we've had relatively low take-up by children in care in terms of the use of that interactive app. It is an interactive app. It's a tool that we can use creatively to get views, thoughts, wishes, feelings from young people that we can then directly use in terms of developing a care and support plan for that young person, as well as getting qualitative feedback to ourselves around quality and impact of the services that we're being offered that young person. We recognised relatively recently that it was being underused, so we had a meeting with the providers of that app, and now the Social Work Academy is actually taking that forward to look at how we can revitalise that. They've actually also developed some additional functions, which we've got some money to support that work as well, so that we get full benefit out of that particular application. And then secondly, this month, yeah, it is this month. This month, we're actually launched a baseline survey to get feedback from children and families around different aspects of our practice. So it's about our ability to get alongside young people, build relationships with them. Did we do that well? Scalers on that. Other things that we could have done differently. Give us some suggestions. Did we make a difference? Scalers on that. So our ideas around that is that that's going across the whole all of the services. We are really pushing that hard because that will give us and you a measure of progress over time. So directly from children and families. So we're doing it now as we're beginning to implement signs of safety, and the hypothesis, I guess, is as we get more into that way of working, we would want to see the quality and the impact go up, as well as understanding that in terms of the story behind that, in terms of what's helping, what's hindering. So we will repeat that again in 6 to 8 months and onwards. So that will give us a direction of travel over time. And we can do similar things with the Mind of My Own app as well, because it generates information and data that we can then use intelligently in terms of planning our services. Liz, is there anything, did you want to add anything to that, Liz?
Only that we've, one of our colleagues in business support, Toby Green, is going to undertake a piece of work in having a look at the kit that social workers have to enable the gathering of wishes and feelings of young people more easily. So, you know, it wouldn't seem unachievable for me for young people to be able to complete something in on, say, a tablet or an iPad, and then we have the ability to store that in their case file. I've long wondered about the whole process of someone coming into your home, doing a visit, having a meeting with you for an hour, then leaving and writing lots of things about you, and you never actually seeing what they write. And I wonder whether there's any mileage in us starting to think about joint recording. Could people record things there and then? And I have had a conversation with Stacey Lane, who's the team manager of the 16 plus service. And this is very, very formative thinking. But, you know, would it be possible to sit down alongside, say, a 15 or 16-year-old and say, OK, we've just had a lovely conversation, or hopefully a lovely conversation for the last half an hour. How would you sum that up? And I'll sum up, you know, or you put in how you sum that up. Now we might get some pretty choice critiques of how it's summed up, but hey ho, if that's how people feel. So I think there's a lot more we can do to gather people's views. I think Mind of My Own is crucial to it, but I would also like to think about maybe having some form of pilot of joint recording with, I was thinking to start with the 16 plus service. They are young people, they're coming into adulthood. We could quite easily, I think, have some kit that would enable them to record their views on their case file. So I think there's lots we could do there.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's brilliant. I mean, the possibilities are endless, really. There was one local authority I worked with where we had a Survey Monkey app, and at the end of the visit, the young person, the family, it's pretty scary, actually rated the quality and the helpfulness of that visit, and then that was uploaded into a central server where you could then track across the service what in real time what children and families were telling us. So Yeah, that, I mean, the other exciting, I think, thing that I've seen, so within signs of safety, you'll get this, is there's a lot of a focus on words and pictures, so that children can tell their story through words and pictures, their own words. So in certain local authorities, they've got tablets. So they'll hand over the tablet to the young person and say, well, draw me how you're feeling.
Yeah.
You know, and then that becomes part of their journey and their record with us, really. And then we can look at how, you know, how that's changing in terms of the picture and the words that they're using to describe their situation, whether it's getting better or worse.
Just to that, Chair, just to say that, Chair, just I wanted to say that obviously that means that I get it's all very early days in using apps like this, and I hesitate to ask for more, but it would be quite good if in the reporting we could have something on how the my own process is working, and if we're getting more actually proactive feedback from youngsters as a result. I think it'd be good to know just how that is impacting on how they feel they're in control of their lives and that they can genuinely say what they feel.
Yeah.
Thanks. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. So I note that the sort of general direction of the improvement plan is showing a positive trend if you look at it in the whole. But what does slightly concern me is the proportion of actions that are essentially reviewing the information and sharing it with the teams or improving the recording of the information, you know, as opposed to thinking creatively about what new actions are we actually going to take which are going to lead to something different. And then it gets particularly concerning with some of the risk assessing around children at risk of exploitation, where essentially the action is saying we want to change the target. Now, I completely accept, Andy, your comment about not wanting to set ourselves up to fail, but we're so far short that it would have been nice to see just a few actions that were very specifically looking at how we're going to improve that rather than just trying to change the target.
Sorry.
Go, Liz.
Yeah, I challenge actually that the only thing we're doing is changing the target. I think what we're doing is bringing the target in line with actually the rest of the country where it's 15 days. I think that to undertake an assessment in a timely manner and being able to gather all the information is actually better in being able to come up with a comprehensive safety plan at the end of that intervention. We know why the performance around exploitation in meeting targets isn't good, and we have spent quite a lot of time looking at the processes that sit behind how we hold risk management meetings, produce safety plans, and produce risk assessments. So actually, we know what we need to do, but it was the way that things were. So, for instance, the way that risk management meetings were being convened, so there could be up to 10 people at the risk management meetings. The way they were being convened was a poor person in business support was trying to contact 10 people and find a date that all those 10 people were available to attend a meeting. That, in my book, means every meeting you ever have is going to be delayed, because trying to, you know, navigate around 10 different people's schedules is a complete nightmare. So what we've actually done is we have said risk management meetings will take place every Tuesday, and when you need a risk management meeting, you will be given a time slot on the next available risk management meeting, and that's the date that your meeting is. So I think that I mean, if we don't see improvement now, then yes, I'll be very worried. But I think some of it is the systems and processes. We've done too much trying to accommodate everybody rather than this is the day that these meetings take place and people have to be available to attend that meeting. From that then will come, because the meeting will take place in timescales and everybody knows when it is and everybody will be there, the safety plan can be put together at that meeting and people can leave with it. So again, we should meet that target then, that the safety plans are presented straight away. And the people who need the safety plans for exploitation, cases where children have been exploited more than anybody, is that young person's parents or carers. So taking all that information away and somebody then producing minutes and a safety plan that's sent out in due course might be lovely for the professionals around the table, but it isn't any good for the parents who that child is going home with at the end of that meeting. So that's why we needed to think about having a system whereby people can leave with something at the end of the meeting, so that everything that's been agreed will be there for the parent carer at the end of that meeting and they go home with it. And that's what we're trying to achieve. So I hope you don't think I sound defensive, but some of it is in how we organise and arrange meetings that we've got to change to make sure they're completed in a timely manner and avoid the drift and delay.
That's much more reassuring. Thank you very much. Could I just follow up with a quick question? I did read somewhere else about the physical COVID secure meeting space and recognising the importance sometimes of physically being in the same place as somebody when doing your assessment. It suggested that wasn't a room that was available. Is there a reason for that? Because that seems quite important.
The majority of meetings at the moment are virtual by dint of the number of people who would be there, but we have been looking at whether perhaps for instance the chair and the parents and the social worker could be in the room and other people attending virtually. It is a challenge. That there are a number of rooms in Plough Lane. Some of them look quite big, but when you start to factor in 8, 9, 10 people in there and having to maintain 2 meters social distance, it really is quite difficult. And there's the issue of having to wear face coverings, etc. So yes, that is a challenge, but it's something that we have been working through now since March. We have enabled families to take part in meetings through them attending virtually with their mobile phones, and have been able to set up the systems to enable that. So yeah, it's something that has been a challenge to all of us, but I think we've managed to continue to have meetings where they have been necessary. And the feedback that we're having from the court, for instance, and the numbers of meetings such as initial child protection conferences and review child protection conferences, looked after children's reviews, we don't seem to be seeing massive delay with those, that we have been able to keep on track with those having the virtual meetings.
Yeah, and I think for us it's always that fine balance between you're trying to be flexible in terms of meeting a child's need, or where we've got concerns about a child's well-being with the safety of our staff, and we have put in a phenomenal amount of time just constantly coming back to that to make sure that our practice guidance is child focused, but at the same time is protective of our staff. And that's a bit of a fine art really to get that right, to be honest with you. And we are constantly reviewing it, but it's a good challenge really, because we're on that challenge weekly to address that balance. And we're also conscious about the needs around the bringing our social workers teams together to safely work together and share and support one another. So we've put certain plans in place that we're looking at the moment about how we could create that safe space at Plough, again, when it's safe to do. But we are being, I wouldn't want you to think that we're not being proactive on that, and I'm not being defensive. We spend a lot of time every week just reviewing all of those protocols to make sure that we're getting the balance right between need and safety.
Anything else, Sam?
That's really helpful. Thank you both.
Mike.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Chair. My question was answered then, but I've got a couple of small questions. I'd just like to, whether it can be answered, the cost of using Essex as service, because obviously what are they getting out of it? So there must be, what is that cost for them coming up and working alongside us? And also, I wonder if you could explain, about a year ago, we were talking about the difficulty of attaining new social workers, and it was somehow we've got 20, and I just wondered if they could explain how, how they managed that quite successfully to get the numbers up.
Yeah, I can take
the first one, and then Andy can take the second, if that's all right. So we don't pay anything for Essex, actually, which is the fantastic thing about peer-to-peer support. I mean, obviously there's a time resource cost. So, for example, Liz spending the time sorting out what they do, but in actual fact, we don't pay anything. That's part of it's part of a national scheme. What we had to put forward was a case, which then the DFE colleague took to a panel, and then the panel within the DFE, and I think it's overseen by one of the ministers, I think, I can't swear to, then determines whether it's successful or not, and then the DFE allocates resource to the partner in practice. So it's funded by the DFE, and we're benefiting from that, and we're benefiting from a good relationship with the DFE improvement advisor, who has been positive about the changes that she's seeing and positive about the impact of the Essex work, and she actually has taken part in some of the signs of safety briefing, and also been part of the Essex feedback. She spent time with the MASH as well, so she started to get a real feel for what's going on in Herefordshire, which is a credit to her, actually. A colleague named Rachel Newton, some advisors don't do that. So it's all part of, a lot of work that we're doing as a senior leadership team, really, to build relationships and build an understanding of Herefordshire with the DFE, the LGA, and with Ofsted, because we do want people to come in from outside and scrutinise and give their views and challenge us, and we are very open about that, as well as benefiting from scrutiny and the work that we do within Herefordshire with members and others as well. This external view is really important for us, because we can be quite insular, although obviously Liz and Andy are from further afield, if I put that, and I was once upon a time, but maybe no longer. Andy, do you want to say?
I mean, the newly qualified social worker story is a brilliant one, really. I mean, we've actually recruited 37, would you believe, since April of this year. What's working currently is we've moved more robustly to a cohort model, so that we will have set times through the year that we recruit newly qualified social workers. So the current cohort that we recruited just a couple of months, 6 weeks ago, they're part of one group, one cohort, and we're putting a lot of time through the Social Work Academy and working closely with the social work teams that the newly qualified social workers are located in to support them, because in their first year, you're probably aware, they're assessed, and it's only at the end of the first year they become fully qualified social workers. So what we want to do is make sure that they have a quality experience with us. And at the moment, I think some of the stuff I was saying to you before, it feels like we're getting that right. Each of those newly qualified social workers has a dedicated person from within the Social Work Academy that's sitting alongside them, supporting them, developing them, as well as doing work within the teams. And within the teams, there are supervisors and supports for the new qualified social workers as well. So our task, really, our objective is, when they have a very good experience with us, which they will do, they'll stay with us past that first year, so that we're all the time increasing our permanent level of staff.
Good.
Can I just make a point regarding the categories of need in child protection plans? We've now obviously got the physical and sexual categories in there. The number of sexual cases is not high, but it is obviously of a concern. Can we be assured that when we had them in, obviously either in the emotional or neglect category, that we did pick up on the fact that there were sexual issues, needs in there that we dealt with, and that we haven't missed this?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Liz, do you want to pick that up? I mean, I think. Well, I would say in terms of the quality assurance work that we've done around this particular area, yes, we have picked up the sexual abuse aspects of the presenting difficulties, really. But Liz, you got anything else to say on that? Or?
So, Louise Bath, who's the principal IRO and was interim head of service for safeguarding and review, did a piece of work looking specifically at the use of the categorisations of abuse, and that's why now you will see, as you've said, Councillor Gandhi, that there are some physical abuse and sexual abuse incidents, and Louise didn't find any cases where sexual abuse had been missed. Now, we know historically, don't we, that sexual abuse is a very secretive, interfamilial sexual abuse I'm talking about here, not child sexual exploitation, is an extremely secretive issue. And so there may be children who we are working with who have been, who are neglected or emotionally harmed, and it may take longer for them to disclose any instances of sexual abuse. But the work that Louise undertook didn't indicate that there was anything that we had missed.
Thank you. Is there any more questions? No? Would the portfolio holder like to make a comment?
Yes, thank you very much. And again, thank you for the discussion over a range of really thoughtful and interesting points. So it is encouraging that the trend is positive and that we are improving slowly but surely. And we absolutely recognise there are areas that still need, considerable improvement. But it is good that the trend is so positive. So perhaps just sort of comment on that first of all. I think the key, or not the key, but a very important element in that is knowing ourselves, which has been mentioned a couple of times. Having a very clear picture of where the improvements are needed, where the action needs to take place, recognising the shortcomings and so on is absolutely vital. And that does seem to be recognised by Essex, for example, when they've been working with us, or Ofsted. So that's an important aspect of this. We still have questions over Mosaic, and it is encouraging that there are new ways of working coming along, making better use of that system. And it may be that at some stage, perhaps you do feel you want to initiate a task and finish, but to me, it seems as if we should be perhaps giving these new methods a bit of a chance to settle in and to improve things. And you will want to hear about that. You'll need to have some report back on that. And possibly after that, there might need to be something further, but perhaps let's see. I was also very encouraged to hear about, I think we all the time, always in, whether it's our parenting or whether it's scrutiny, whatever it is, we want to know what young people think. We want to know that they're being consulted and that we are working with them and with their views. And so really interested in this idea of joint recording, perhaps working with young people and positively making sure we do have those views and that they are sharing that process with us. That does seem to me to be a very sensible way forward. And finally, so much else one could say, but it's great that you are wanting to hear more about the signs of safety process. And I know Councillor Gandhi and one or two others have been in on a briefing, which was really good, very interesting indeed. And we do actually want to have a programme of briefings on issues that are of significance and are really making an impact, and that's certainly one of them. So we hope to be doing something along those lines in the new year, I think is what we're aiming for at the moment. But yes, And again, any thoughts you have on, you know, the sort of councillor briefings that you think could be helpful, we'd like to hear about it and we'd be happy to accommodate it. I think it's a really good way. We want to share, you know, the different things that are happening and the good practice and how it's working. So yes, very keen to hear anything about. So many thanks everybody for both officers of the report and yourselves for the input on this.
Thank you, Felicity. Matt, do we have recommendations?
Okay, we've got something around the scheduling of meetings and ensuring that they're closer to the publication of quarterly data for the improvement plan. There was a request or a recommendation for...
I can't hear you, Matt. You've gone mute.
Okay, sorry about that. Did you get the first recommendation,
Yes,
which was about the
we did,
scheduling
yeah,
meetings?
yeah.
The second recommendation was more detail in the improvement plan around mosaic and the use of systems or technology to enable better social work practice.
Yep.
There was also a recommendation to feed this back to the executive in response to the recommendation they had raised. Yep. So that is how we will seek to review in future. And then there's also a recommendation around the recording of feedback from young people and detail in the improvement plan as to how that was being taken forward as well.
Yep. Does anybody else have any other recommendations?
I just wanted to add, Chairman, that particularly mentioning Mind of My Own app and feedback on that in the recording of information. Just to add that to the recommendation, please, Matt.
Okay, that last one. Your last recommendation there,
yeah. Thanks.
Okay, I'll propose those recommendations. Do I have a seconder?
Yeah, I'll second.
All those. Well, right. We now need to. The non-voting attendees need to be moved now into the breakout room. Can we please know how many people are entitled to vote? Thank you.
Yes, Chair, there are 5 voting members and they may cast their vote now.
Okay.
Yeah, those votes are in. 4 have voted to approve those recommendations with 1 abstention.
Okay. We bring the people back, the non-voting members back into the room, please. Abstention. Okay, we've got everybody back. Thank you. We now move on then to item 9, which is the work programme review. The committee is asked to review the work programme for 2020-2021, which was attached with the agenda. And basically to comment on anything on there that they feel they'd like to make any requests for additional items. The executive committee responses to the child exploitation task and finish group and the recommendations from the scrutiny of the peer-on-peer abuse report are attached for comment to note. A tracker of recommendations is also attached as the appendix for the committee to note. You will see the recommendations, you will see the comments from the Cabinet with regards to peer-on-peer abuse. At the meeting, it was pointed out, and this was something that happened after we'd had our meeting. At our meeting, we asked for a review as an inquiry, if you like, as to why the CSO report hadn't been available to us or mentioned during our spotlight review and our meeting in June. Between our meeting and the cabinet meeting, which was held recently, a decision was taken that be an independent review rather than an internal review, and so the wording that word has been changed. Well, that word has been added to our recommendation. Apart from that, our recommendations have been either fully or partly accepted, and where they have been partly accepted, it's because we do not have the power as a scrutiny committee to actually impose a policy upon a school. We can issue guidance, but we can't impose the policy upon them. So I hope all of you recognise, why some of these have only been partially accepted. Okay, and I did ask on your behalf at the cabinet meeting that the independent review inquiries into the CSO report be conducted and completed as soon as possible, so that we can sort of, from our point of view, draw a line under this particular issue of the CSO report and move on to other matters. With regards to the recommendations from the Child Exploitation Task and Finish Group, I don't know whether Councillor Toynbee would like to make some comments on that one.
Yes, thank you. And firstly, I echo what you said about the executive response on pure sexual abuse, and I recommend anybody who's interested in this issue that you listen again to the cabinet meeting last week, because I thought it was very useful, sort of plain speaking discussion of the issue and where we've gone wrong and what we must do. And as far as we're concerned as a committee, I'm sure obviously it'll continue. We're going to be continuing to keep an eye on it, and in particular the issue that these aren't just incidents, they have an ongoing effect on victims. And we're going to be looking at, I think on our work programme is some work on children's mental health and the various services available in the county. So that's another continuation of this theme, which I welcome. Yeah, on the task and finish, yes, it's a year. It's a year since we did that piece of work, almost exactly. So again, it's very good to see that the executive have accepted our recommendations either fully or partially. And as with the other one, if it's partial, it's not for the principal, it's from practical points of view or the point of view of the limitations of our powers. And it's been really good to, I've noticed that in our meeting today, child exploitation has come up a lot, which is really interesting. And since we did our task and finish, we've got Andy Gill and we've got another new colleague, Salwa Farid. So that's, that's all really good news. So I'm really glad that this is still at the forefront of our minds. And I think I'm optimistic that as a county, we can be really good on this.
Yeah. Thank you, Diana. There are, as we talked about in the pre-meeting, there were a number of items that were considered in the workshop that we did regarding our programme going forward, and some of those are commented on in the main papers. We're going to bring a scoping document to the January meeting on paediatric therapies. That's to do with speech and language, or occupational therapy, physiotherapy, and similar. And we will bring the scoping document in January, and we'll do that as a task and finish group. With regards to SEND, myself and Diana met with Officer Les Knight to talk about this. It's a very broad subject, it's quite complex, and I think we felt that in the first instance, we should have a briefing note on this, and then we would look at whether there was any particular area within special educational needs and disabilities that we wanted to look at as a task and finish group, rather than just bring it forward with a scoping document, because it is a huge and very complex issue. So that, and does anybody else have any comments to make with regards to the work programme? We talked about CAMS, and Diana referred to it earlier. I circulated a document that we received from CAMS, which is basically a list of their waiting times. It's not very helpful. It's a factual document, but it doesn't actually tell us very much. It doesn't tell us an awful lot about criteria. I think we really want something more than that. But I feel at this present, and we've also got a delay till March with regards to the report that Kerry's bringing forward on the effects of COVID. And in fairness to Kerry, part of the reason is because of the effects of COVID upon Kerry with regards to schools being open, then closed, and open, then closed. And so I think we understand. And I know Paul has particular concerns about the effect of education on pupils as a result of COVID, and is very keen that we make sure we do bring this forward before the end of the municipal year and the AGM. So unless anybody has any burning desire for anything else to be added at this moment in time, bearing in mind that the January meeting will be the budget, and we obviously have to get in schools performance as well, which won't be probably in the same format as it has been in the past, but it is something we would want to look at. And I think some of the schools performance obviously has been impacted by COVID and will be very helpful to us when we're looking at the effects upon young people as a result of the COVID pandemic. So is there anything else? Yes, Philip.
Just a quick point to add, the effect of COVID, I gave a list of things I thought we should consider doing, about half of them. One of the ones I actually said was that at the time there was evidence that children's care referrals had fallen during the early period of lockdown, and vulnerable people weren't being referred back. And I said, what's the state of this in Herefordshire? But actually I've had a subsequent report that said after that lockdown, child referral cares are actually have more than substantially increased again. And it'd be good if the report, when looking at the effects of COVID, just what that actually means, because it seems to be a bit contradictory. So if we could include that in Andy's report, I appreciate it.
Is that all right? Yep.
Yep.
So does anybody else have anything they want to add, or do they feel we've got enough for our January meeting and our March meeting, and we'll have a task and finish in between? And it would be helpful if I mean, we obviously have a rough idea what the task and finish scoping document is going to be. If anybody has a burning desire to be involved with that task and finish scoping, about that task and finish group, please let Matt know, so that we've got some idea of members of the committee that might be wanting to be involved in that. And then obviously we will open it up to other members of the council who may want to be involved as well. Okay. All right. So Matt, do we need to vote again on this, don't we? So have we got any recommendations, Matt?
Yes, please. Well, what I'll do is I'll share the recommendations on screen, and then we'll move the non-voting members into the breakout room and conduct the vote as before. So if the recommendations could be proposed and seconded as before, please.
I'll propose them. Is there a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Paul Andrews. Okay, so if the non-voting members are moved into the breakout room.
Okay, Chair, so there's 7 voting members on this item. And they may vote now. And those have been unanimously accepted.
Okay, we can bring the non-voting members back into the room. Okay, so we move on then to item 10, which is the date of the next meeting, which is the 12th of January at 1 o'clock. Before I close the meeting, I'd just like to say, may I wish officers and councillors and members of the public a good festive break in these difficult times, and for your patience and diligence in allowing our meetings to continue throughout the pandemic. We are one of the few, well, we are the only, I think, scrutiny committee that has managed to have all of their meetings during the pandemic. And I think that's to be admired, particularly on the part of officers. I would particularly like to thank Matt and in his absence, John, for all their help in ensuring that these meetings have happened. And finally, I would like to offer my thanks and appreciation to all the staff working in the Children's Families Directorate during this most difficult year, and hope that in 2021, we will see us all in a better place. Okay? And I wish you a happy new year.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and to you too, and thank you for those words. Yeah, much
Absolutely.
appreciated for us all.
Yeah. Thank you, Carol, and everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Chair.
Thank you.
Happy Christmas.
Thank
See you
you.
next
Happy
year.
Christmas.
Yeah.